So I got a little behind myself this morning. I was doing some photo curation and working on some portfolio stuff. And, oh shit, I got to do a show. So mellow morning, slow news cycle, and that's what I want to talk about. So yesterday was September 11th. We didn't talk about it on the show yesterday, and I normally don't. Uh, we used to, but frankly, we've done it. It's been done. But there is some stuff that I want to talk about because obviously yesterday, um, we covered the debate. We talked about how the debate went, and the interesting thing that I want you guys to pay attention to. Kamala's team had all the control on scheduling the debate. And we've seen a lot of commentary on social media. Some is probably just conspiracy theory nonsense, but one that I keep seeing is, oh well, Kamala obviously got the questions in advance and prepared very specific scripted answers to each of the questions. Uh that's not what you saw at all. Kamala, yes indeed. Kamala had um very carefully scripted, memorized answers to all of the specific questions. But if you think that ABC is so in the bag that they just handed her the questions ahead of time so that she could prepare, then you missed something. That's not how this works. What really happened, almost certainly, because this is how political campaigns work, the thing that you have to understand about a political campaign is the very core of it, the very nature of it. It is a psyop. Now, the term psyop is kind of like the term conspiracy theory, um, as far as colloquial usage, and that's something that we need to work on. A conspiracy theory is a legitimate thing. Now, when people say the words conspiracy theory, especially when you use those words used by liberal media, what they are intending to convey is that by the very fact of a thing being a conspiracy theory, that presupposes that the theory is itself outlandish, it's insane. It's, in fact, by the time you hear the words conspiracy theory, it is as likely as not that you have already heard the term debunked associated with whatever claim it is that's being referred to as a conspiracy theory. But a conspiracy theory is an actual thing. It's not, it was first used, it was first circulated by the CIA as, and this is not a conspiracy theory, this is something that we have from declassified documents. But it was used as a term created to debunk, or not debunk, rather to defame and discredit people who had suspicions about certain activities, like the Kennedy assassination, things like that. But that pair of words, conspiracy theory, actually means something. If a lawyer alleges that more than one person was involved in the planning of a crime, right? Until the evidence has been presented, adjudicated, prosecuted, and decided upon, the fact is that legally, what you're talking about is a conspiracy theory, right? If Mrs. Jones hired an assassin to help her claim her life insurance benefits from her husband, who suddenly died in a mysterious accident, if the prosecutor alleges that that's what happened, that the wife hired the killer, that allegation is a conspiracy theory. Now, the fact that it's a conspiracy theory in that context does not immediately debunk the allegation. Certainly. Well, a similar thing is happening with. So you have the conspiracy theories, and you have damn. I was just comparing it to another piece of Another piece of language, and I lost my track there. Uh the conspiracy theory being a conspiracy theory does not necessarily mean that it's debunked. Um Completely lost my train of thought. What was I talking about before that? The psyop. So the word psyop is similar. A psychological operation is a thing that has a meaning, right? That term has a meaning. It means that you have crafted a plan to take specific actions. In this case, the use and dissemination of particular types of messaging in order to have an effect on the psyche, on the psychological state, on the thinking, on the habits, on the opinions of a target populace. When we hear the word psyop now, people tend to hear, oh, basically, that's a conspiracy theory, right? There was the whole thing about Taylor Swift a few months ago, and to be clear, I'm I'm not defending or debunking the whole Taylor Swift psyop narrative, the psyop conspiracy theory. Although, eh, there is something that just happened that's a little suspicious, and this does go back to the Harris campaign being in charge. But a psyop, a psychological operation, um, that language is treated as if the appearance of that phrase in conversation immediately debunks, refutes whatever the claim is associated with. But for those that suspect that ABC gave the questions to the Harris campaign, let me disabuse you of that notion. You are underestimating the relative position of the Harris campaign in the hierarchy of anti American organizations. The fact is more likely that the Harris campaign wrote the questions to craft the narrative that they wanted to pursue and then provided those questions to ABC. The Harris campaign contacted the anchors and said, you know, here it is. You will ask these questions, and you will not fact check Kamala. Whatever Kamala says is gospel. You will fact check the Donald, you will not fact check Kamala. It is also no accident that the debate was scheduled for the day before 9/11. Nor is it an accident that immediately after the debate, Taylor Swift started posting on X about how she is now supporting Kamala. Right? Essentially, it smells very much like the Harris campaign said, yeah, she might not have failed as miserably as we expected her to, but this was still not a win. Deploy Taylor, right? Execute Order 89. Deploy Taylor Swift. Get her out there. Get her talking. Get the campaign. Get the debate out of the news cycle. They scheduled it the day before 9/11 because they knew that yesterday's news coverage would be all about 9/11 memorial services, the remembrance, all the this, all of that. They did it that way on purpose. So I cannot stress this enough. You are emotionally insufficient to the task of hating the current regime sufficiently because they are bent on your absolute destruction. It is, we hear rhetoric often that, today's Democrat is not the same as yesterday's Democrat. That's not true. Not in matter of category. They're categorically the same thing. The if I'm being generous, the only distinction is in the distinction of extent. They are more dangerous and evil than they were in the past. But really, that's not the case. That's the most generous I could kind of term it. But the fact is, they are the party of the slippery slope, right? They put the thumb on the scale for Obamacare for 100 years before they got it, right? You can go back to the 90s with Clinton in office and Hillary, and we were hearing about Hillary Care, which was largely defeated by Christian conservatives who were concerned about they referred to it as the mark of the beast, and went full revelations and started talking all this end time sign of the beast type stuff. But the big bugaboo for them at that time wasn't even that it was socialized medicine. It was that the Hillary Care plan included the invention, patenting, and implementation of a subcutaneous RFID chip that would carry your financial records and your medical history on it. And there were concerns, valid, but let's be clear about that, very valid concerns that such an invasion of privacy would be very, very bad for Americans. You look at today, and we have the social credit scores in China that are slowly being implemented in America through your voluntarily acquired surveillance device through your smartphones. And clearly the V-chip stuff was a legitimate concern. Now, while all that is true, and it is very likely that the debate was scheduled for the day before 9/11 because they wanted that fallback. They wanted to be able to just get it out of the news cycle as fast as possible because Kamala is dodging the press, like Neo dodging bullets. While all that is true, it's also fair, and I said this yesterday, Trump got the zingers. He was absolutely right to close on the question of, hey, if you want to do all this wonderful stuff, Kamala, you're in the White House now. Do it. Why haven't you done the things that you're promising to do? If all these things are so good and important and valuable, why haven't you done them? Why aren't you doing them? Why aren't you doing it now? He didn't bring his A game. And we covered all this yesterday, so I won't relitigate that too extensively. But you've got the 9/11 thing and you've got the Taylor Swift thing. Clearly, they were terrified of the idea of Kamala being in front of a camera. And they were right to do. What most of America saw night before last in that debate was Kamala Harris making these weird, just bizarre facial tics, and to her credit, she managed to evade the cackle, but only just. Waller says, I find it curious that people are up in arms about social media and government influences, but kind of ignore the same capabilities through insurance companies. Nope, I'm not going to address. I was going to talk about that a little bit, but that's a deeper rabbit hole that I want to go down. The wake him up line was excellent. Yes, Tim, that was excellent. But now what we're seeing on social media following that debate, of course, we're seeing a lot of stuff about 9/11, and I'm going to close this show when in a few minutes when I wrap this up. I'm going to tell you guys about where I was on 9/11 and where I was on 9/11 in 2010. So we'll talk about that a little bit in just a minute. But the mad rush on social media to shift the narrative has been amusing to watch. I spent a little time doom scrolling Twitter and looking at that stuff early this morning. And I've seen claims that Mike DeWine, it is DeWine, right? The governor of Ohio. So yeah, it says Mike DeWine came out and said that there's no migrants. That the story isn't what Trump said it was. Y'all, let me let me disabuse you of that notion as well. A couple things there. The story about Haitians eating pets and pets disappearing, et cetera, et cetera. We have a few government officials who are saying that it's not happening, except they're not. They're not saying that it's not happening. They know better than to say that because that's a lie. And they know that's a lie. Think back to that moment in the debate where Trump mentioned it, right? Trump mentioned the story about Springfield, Ohio, having the pets disappearing, et cetera, et cetera. And David David Lemert, the moderator, jumped in. He's like, "Oh well, actually, we had contacted the city manager, and he said that they've received no credible reports of the event." Aha! What he did not say is that we have multiple sources declaiming the notion. What he did not say is that the city manager said we're receiving no reports. No. Listen very carefully to the words he said. We contacted the city manager, and he said that he hasn't received any credible reports. Now, there are videos for days. There's one that's running on Twitter right now. It's a half hour of 10 to 20 second answers of locals on the ground saying, yeah, I've heard a friend of mine say that his dog disappeared. I've heard another friend. I heard one friend say that his buddy had a dog disappeared. I heard a girl say it. Locals. You've got people who live in the community. This is not a huge community. Now it's bigger than where I live. Like the total population of the county I live in is less than 3,000 on purpose. But you look at what's going on with the locals, and the people on the ground are saying this is happening. Now, the city manager, right, David Muir's claim is this. Let me translate this claim for you so that you understand it correctly. Because what they're doing is they are very carefully telling you a lie that is not technically a lie. He said that one person who is friendly to the Kamala Harris campaign, politically, has said that his personal opinion is that the claims are not credible. He did not say there have been no claims or no reports from the people. He said that we have received no credible claims. So you have one person saying that his opinion of the reports he's received is that those reports are not credible. That is a very different statement than evidence does not exist to support the claim. In fact, in any case, even if you're talking about absolutely unbelievable evidence, a large amount of evidence, even if that evidence is incredible, unbelievable, a large amount of evidence is in fact evidence. That doesn't mean that evidence is going to prove a claim. But the existence of bad evidence and the total absence of evidence are two very, very different things. Now, the individual residents of the place actually saying, I've heard, that's testimony. It's not good evidence. It's certainly not great evidence, but it is in fact evidence. And I promise you, you could be talking about a murder case. If you've got 50 people come through and say, I don't know exactly what happened, but something happened, you're going to come to the conclusion that something happened. And something happened is a far cry from nothing happened. even if that something happening was completely misinterpreted by the witnesses at hand. And hey, credit where credit's due. To be perfectly fair, eyewitness testimony is incredibly unreliable. It is. People, the average person hasn't played Kate's game, right? The average person does not have extreme attention to detail. They don't come out of the room and sit down and draw you a picture of the room. That's not a thing, right? Waller, I think you were there when we played Kate's game. I did it several times while I was active duty. What it is, we take a room, right? This one would be a good one for it. This would be a good room for Kate's game, right? Because there's a bunch of, decorative objects, as it were. When we did it, we just closed up the company office and, Waller says humans is hardly an int. But Treebeard is definitely an int. But we had a folding table with a bunch of objects on it. It was like a coffee cup and a stapler and pens and pencils and notepads, et cetera, et cetera. And so we were escorted into the room. We were given 1 minute to observe the table, and then we were escorted out. The door was closed behind us. Then we did a 10-mile ruck march, and then we did a 5-mile run, and then we went to the gas chamber, and then we did under stress target acquisition drills where you run until you're exhausted, and then you pick up a rifle and try to shoot. You try to shoot the bad guy instead of the hostage. We did all that. We did about 6 or 7 hours of intense PT type training, and then at the end of that, we were given a drink of water and a notepad and a pen. It said, "Okay, now draw as many of the items as you can remember from the table." Right? We did that a few times, and I was good at that game. I am a rare bird in that position. Most people cannot sit down and draw you the 20 or 30 items that they observed, 5, 6, 8 hours ago for 1 minute, perform under stress, and then remember what they observed. That's most of you are not Sean from Psych, right? Most of you are not Sherlock Holmes. Danny, no, this wasn't boot. Dad said AT. Danny, no. Yeah, this was something we did at we did a lesser extent. We did it a couple times at DLI. We didn't do the gas chamber at the language college. We did it once at Goodfellow, and then we did it we did it a lot in Hawaii. Especially the year before we went to Afghanistan. So I could go down the rabbit hole a little longer, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tell you my 9/11 story, and then we'll put a pin in it there. So when 9/11 happened, I was working with Rod Purvis, who watches the show sometimes. Pity he's not watching this morning. I need to give Rod a call. I haven't talked to him in probably a month or two. Anyway, at the time, I was working for Rod doing title examination. I was a deed dog with Rod, and basically what it was is we had several lawyers as clients, and barely had cell phones, right? I had a cell phone because I had the kind of job where I could make use of one. I had a cell phone and a pager back then. And, you get a call and they give you the information. You got your little notepad, name, social security number, address, last date of purchase, a lot ID. They rattle off about, between 5 and 10 key data points to get you to the right property. And then you go run the title to make sure that the people selling it or the people trying to refinance the property actually own the property. You'd be amazed how often people try to sell things that they don't own. Like, I mean, amazed. That was a revelation to me. that that you actually need to pay somebody to go do title examination when you're buying a house, because the guy that's selling it might not own it. Without watching too much dirty laundry, we've got a family member right now going through this, where somebody else is trying to sell his house out from under him, and thankfully we know what's going on and we're able to shut that shit down. But some people get away with it anyway. So, paint you a picture. The Fulton County Courthouse, the seat of the Fulton County government in Atlanta, Georgia, is, or actually they may have moved it by now, because it's been a hot minute. It's been over 20 years now, but it's still in the same building. Is right next to where Underground Atlanta used to be, and the World of Coca-Cola still is. It's right. They share a very large parking structure. Back then, Rod and I would show up in the morning, and we would be standing at the doors of the courthouse waiting for them to unlock it. Right? So we were there before the door opened, and the second they opened the door, we were in. And we would stay there and work and make money until somebody with a gun came around and said, "Hey, we're closing the courthouse. You have to leave now." And go outside, and you'd be so cross-eyed from brain work for all those hours. You go outside, sit on the park bench in front of the World of Coke, smoke a cigarette, and stare at the concrete pavers until your eyes uncross. So that's where we were when the towers got hit. When the first tower got hit, there was a radio tuned to WSB Atlanta, and we were listening to, it wasn't Rush at the time. I think it was, damn, I forget the other one. I forget the other guy's name. I remember, not Rush. Anyway, we were listening to the radio, and the report came in that the first tower hit. And Rod looked at me and said, "That doesn't happen by accident. We need to get out of here right now." And I was like, yeah, no shit. Now this is a long time ago. This is before I was Bortz. Thank you, Tim. It was Neil Bortz we were listening to, and we heard the towers get hit. And Rod said, "Yeah, that's not a thing that happens." And honestly, at the time, I was young enough. I had probably heard of the World Trade Towers at that point in my life, but I didn't know what the hell they were. I had no idea what the hell they were. But when they said World Trade Towers, right, I understood that meant something, that was important. And Rod gave me a history lesson on the World Trade Towers and the previous terrorist attacks that attempted to take them down but failed. We had a conversation about that as we walked outside. Now back then, I was driving a van that Dad gave me, when I was a teenager. It was an old Dodge conversion van, and it was very chic at the time. There was a television in it, and so Rod and I went and sat in the van and watched the second one get hit. We watched that live. And when the second tower got hit, that was when we both knew unequivocally, okay, this is not an accident happening. This is an act of war being committed against the United States. We are going to war. There's no two ways about it. It might have been an extraordinary catastrophic accident if one of the towers had gotten hit, but both of them? It doesn't matter who's responsible. It doesn't matter if Bush planned it. It doesn't matter if it was an inside job. None of that matters for the analysis here, because the fact is, once both towers were hit by separate aircraft, there is no longer a reasonable doubt that this was planned in advance and intentional. Forget about who the responsible parties are for the sake of this conversation. We knew right then, this is happening. We are now on a war footing. Even if we don't know who the enemy is yet, we know this. We know that this was intentional and it cannot go unanswered. So we had a brief conversation about what the consequences of that being would be. And one of those obvious consequences was gas is about to be more than $1 a gallon. Because at the time it wasn't. At the time, gas was between 90 and 98 cents a gallon. It was always less than $1, right? If you was in high cotton if you found yourself in a neighborhood where gas was $1.02, $1.05. That just didn't happen before 9/11. Not in Georgia, anyway. So we went and filled up the van, and sure enough, the next day there were a lot of places that had gas at like $8, $9, $10 a gallon for an afternoon before a bunch of noise about price gouging, and it leveled back out. But there were a bunch of gas stations that just went crazy. They were like, oh, and there's a whole conversation to be had there. I would argue that at least to some extent it was reasonable for the gas stations to jack their prices up for a couple of reasons in that very limited set of circumstance, but that's neither here nor there. We filled up the van and we went to Michael's, which is a restaurant. I don't know if it's still there or not. I imagine it is. It's a fine dining restaurant in Decatur, not too far from the courthouse. And we went and ate there, and I had a very good steak and a very nice salad with pine nuts on it. But before we got to the restaurant, I tried to call my dad, and he didn't answer the phone. Now, that's a big deal, right? I'm sure a lot of you, when it happened, you tried to call somebody. You tried to call your mom, your dad, you tried to call family. And a good son might have called his mom first to make sure she was okay, except here's a little piece of data that's important to this important context. At the time, I knew that my mother was safe and sound at home in Georgia. A solid 24-hour drive away from where the shit was going. But I knew my dad at the time was stationed at Fort Meade. Basically right there in the intersection with the Pentagon and everything. And on a base, no less. So he's on a military base close to the action. And I knew that was going to involve a lockdown. I did not at the time understand that it was going to involve a commo blackout. And I certainly had no concept at the time of why a commo blackout is important. Having been to war and done the deed now, I fully understand. Commo blackouts are even more important now because your information leaks like a sieve. But I called Dad, and he didn't answer. Well, of course he didn't answer. There were commo blackout, lockdown. Shit was going crazy. We went and ate. Dad finally called me back, told me he was okay. And if I remember correctly, Sergeant Major, you were at Ground Zero the next day. I'm not sure I remember the details of that particularly well, but that was a big day, obviously. And I'm sure most of you have a story. You remember where you were when the towers went down. But let's fast forward a little bit. In 2010, on September 11th, I was in Afghanistan, fighting a war ostensibly related to the fallout from the September 11th attacks, almost 10 years later. It was 9 years later, but of course we kept saying almost 10 years later. Yep, Megan, I remember that. Yep, that was basically right after the story I just told. I got back to Conyers and we all met at Darlene's house. Mm. But in 2010, I'm in Afghanistan, and on 9/11, they had memorial stuff up in the chow halls and around base on Kandahar and Bagram, stuff like that. But it was pretty minor event as far as the memorial and the conversation of it goes. But Taliban, Al Qaeda, all those Arab terrorist groups, they have loved to do something big. They want to kill a bunch of Americans on 9/11. That was really a thing for a long time. So our security posture was substantially different on 9/11. Even in a war zone, it was substantially different on 9/11 than at any other time during the war. And on every 9/11, horror there. And I remember then having this conversation with more than one soldier that, man, it's crazy that we're still here 9 years later. And it doesn't, there's nothing with Obama in office at the time, there was nothing at all to suggest that there was any reasonable withdrawal proposal, right? Obama ran on, I'm going to end the war in Afghanistan. I'm going to bring our troops home. And of course he didn't. He made it all very much worse. But then we were saying, it's crazy that we're still here almost a decade later. And as you all know, another full decade would come to pass before Joe Biden finally took a shit on Afghanistan. And I hate to say it, we would be better off. We would be in better shape financially, and with respect to foreign policy, we would be better off today if we were still in Afghanistan than we are with the fallout of the withdrawal. I'm not saying I want us in Afghanistan. I'm not even saying that I'm particularly fond of that particular war. I love a good war, and that wasn't one of them. But so much was lost, and so much harm was, so much money, and so much life, so much security and respect. Waller asks, did you see our MQ-9s at the China military parade? Yeah, I did. Biden essentially funded every war that any terrorist organization wants to conduct for the next 50 years by the way that he withdrew from Afghanistan. Took a complete shit on it. And because it's relevant to the time, I'll go ahead and add this little button on that. Kamala was the last one in the room. She absolutely owns that as part of her record, as part of her legacy. And that is a bullet point on her resume going into the election. And I see you guys. I know y'all are gonna make the right decision, but I'm pennies to pesos. You know somebody who's dumber than you. Help them choose world peace and cheap gas. Please help them choose world peace and cheap gas. So, y'all be safe out there. Thanks for watching this morning. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.